All right. So as we worked our way through the last couple of weeks, we have worked our way through the RPA and the RLA, the listing agreements and the purchase agreements. And we've worked our way through all of those kind of things. So here's the issue just a little bit, and that's a great start. I'm glad we got all of that done. But I just wrote down here when I was putting this together, it takes more than a contract to make a contract. And I know that sounds a little redundant and a little funny and things, but the RPA does not complete what it is that we're trying to do. And so we have multiple forms to try to take care of redirecting, helping people understand, adding people to, anyway, all of the things that we have that go on with a contract, not even including the disclosures and things that are involved. But today what we're going to do, and it's going to seem a little, I don't know, it's going to seem a little hit and miss as we're going through it. You may not remember the RPA that we covered a week ago, or hopefully you remember it well, and all of these will fit into place. But I'm going to try to tie in all of the things today, amendment-wise and addendum-wise and counteroffer-wise, to actually put an entire contract together and all the things that can happen. Are they all required on everything? Certainly not. However, many of them are just about every time. So we're going to talk about that right now. And we're just going to go through kind of the way the contract reads and things. But obviously, one of the first things that you need to do, one of the things it asks is if this is a residential purchase agreement, does it apply to a manufactured home? The residential purchase agreement, remember when we talked, there's only one residential purchase agreement. The residential purchase agreement applies to all residences, and 1 to 4 units, and all of those kind of things apply. Single family residence, if you can live in it, it's a residence, and the residential purchase agreement is what handles those things. Now, that being said, we still have to identify whether things are manufactured home or whether other things are going on. And we're going to cover those things right now. So one of the little check boxes is going to identify the manufactured home purchase addendum as a form that has to be added because it's a manufactured home. I know we think to ourselves, you can tell it's a manufactured home, for crying out loud. Well, that's true. However, we still have to identify it. So I'm going to quickly hit on how we identify a manufactured home. Here we have, there are actual 3 different types of manufactured homes. I know that sounds funny, but there are. And it's not really what type they are, because there's lots of types, but it is how it relates to a purchase agreement and a contract. So the first type is a manufactured home on leased land. So that means it's in a park, it has a space number, the park has a name, it's located in some city. It is personal property, because notice it says on leased or rented land. So it's like buying a car or a boat or a travel trailer or something else. It is on leased or rented land. So if you are leasing or renting the land in a park, then the important information has to do with space number and the park address and things. I didn't put a park address in there because I don't even know that there is a Spring Mountain park name. I just wrote that in there when I was putting this together. So the second type is a manufactured home. Notice everything is a manufactured home. Now, manufactured home to be sold with real property. And that is a manufactured home that where the land is included in the price. You actually own the land. You could still be in a park. We have manufactured home parks where you own the lot that your mobile home is on, that your manufactured home is on, and you own it as well as the manufactured home. But it's still in a park. So I mean, it could be in a park, or it could be out on a farm. It could be out somewhere outside of town a ways. It could be up on a hill or up on a mountain or who knows what. But it includes the lot. All right, so here we have a parcel number for the lot. So we have the real property located in whatever city and whatever county and whatever zip code, and we own the lot, so we also have a parcel number. When we do that, we also have an allocation of price. How much do you think the manufactured home is worth, and how much do you think the real property is worth? And boy, I'll tell you, do we get into it on that? And I'm just going to tell you that I've been in business for 35 years. And in 35 years, I use the same method of pricing these things just about all the time. And that is that I look at what I get and I guess. And I know that sounds crazy, but you know, manufactured home, when it comes off of the manufactured home lot, when it's delivered out of Skyline Mobile Homes and went out and dropped on a property, you know what the manufactured home is worth. And you know what you paid for the real property. And those things are identified in your tax paperwork. You will have some tax paperwork because there's real property involved. But it only identifies the real property. It does not identify the manufactured home. So if I'm listing something for $400,000 and I look at the tax papers in Real List or Real Tax or something, and the real property assessment is $150,000, then in my mind, that guess that I'm talking about, automatically I just fill in the difference. Do I know that the manufactured home is worth that much or not? I don't know. I don't have a way to go back. Like there is a Kelley Blue Book for manufactured homes, but it's kind of silly because all it does is identify the home. It doesn't identify all of the features that might be around it by now. Maybe I've put in a detached garage. Maybe I've put in a carport on both sides of the house. Maybe I have a patio. Maybe I have an expando unit. Maybe I've just maybe, and you can see that those numbers can really run up there. So you take the value of a real property, and that varies too. That's why I'm saying that's a little bit of guesswork, because real property, if I'm looking at property that's in a park, for instance, so the lot is only 3,000 square feet or 3,900 square feet or something, versus if it's out on a 20-acre piece of property. Now, obviously, the 20-acre piece of property is going to be worth more than the lot in a mobile home park. So you can see the fluctuating prices there depending on what's going on. Look at your tax rolls and find out what the county assessors have established as a price for the real property. Look at what it sold for back in the day. You can find that off of the property profile. And you can kind of make an educated guess, but I throw in guess because there is no 0.73% is for the home and 0.27% is for there's no magic number there. But guess what? There's no magic number that an appraiser uses either. So the appraiser is going to do kind of the same thing. He's going to look at tax rolls. He's going to look at property prices. And he's going to put that down as a price. Now, the property obviously has some improvements, maybe from what somebody paid for it. Maybe it's out on a ranchy type area and it needed a well, and so they had to put in a well, and then they had to put in a septic, and then they have to put in a holding tank for extra water because the well won't produce enough for what they're trying to do with the house. So you can see when we get into this number here, it's a little bit of a guess. And the best thing I can tell you is that the real property is probably going to be worth a third of the price of what the combined total is when you do it. So think of that when you're pricing things, but it is a little bit of a guess. So then let's talk about this one, a real property manufactured home. See, now here we have a personal property manufactured home. That's the one with space rent. Here we have a manufactured home to be sold with real property. And here we have a real property manufactured home, which means that the manufactured home was brought in and it was put on a permanent foundation. So it's not movable, so it collateralizes better for a lender. And it meets the following requirements. There's a building permit obtained from local authorities. The manufactured home is affixed to a foundation, and a certificate of occupancy is issued by local authorities. And there is recordation with the local authorities. So all of those things is just like if you were building a house somewhere. Now, the code that they established for that is 433. So when you're looking for things, does it have a 433 foundation? That means that it's gone through all the coding, it's gone through all of the, it's met all those requirements. And once we've met all those requirements, now guess what the benefit of that is? The benefit is that when we meet all those requirements, we now are in a pretty good position to get standard mortgage rates when we buy the home. Can we get loans on the others? Yes, we can. However, the mortgage rates are going to be different. You're going to pay a little higher interest. You may have to come in with more down payment or anything. But by the time we get to a real property manufactured home, which is one that has a 433 or is on a permanent foundation, then we can get regular, whatever the fees are at the time. Maybe it's 6.6 today or something as far as interest rates go. So that 6.6 will be okay for this, just like it's okay for a stick-built house in a development. The other sticking point, however, and I wrote it over here on the right, remember June 15th, 1976. And the reason you need to remember that is because that is the date that all of these health and safety codes and everything else, and a bunch of others, took effect. And it had to do with how the manufactured home was built, what the dimensions of the walls had to be, the construction of the framing, the roof, and all the different things. And without going into manufactured homes in detail, enough changed during that period after June 15th, 1976, that is one of the keys to getting standard mortgage rates and being able to finance a home at a reasonable price. So remember 433, that's the foundation, and remember June 15th, 1976. All right, then we go through here and we fill out all of these numbers that we can because we want to make sure that we're selling the right property. So there could be HUD numbers, there could be serial numbers, there could be HCD insignias, there could be any of these things on the house. And that's just something that we need to find out. If we only have one of these numbers, we can get title search to fill in the rest. We can do that in escrow. But we have to have a number of some kind. Otherwise, it's a lot more difficult. All right, a couple of things that you need to know. HCD fees, and that is for registering properties that the manufactured home and the land are together, but they aren't on one tax roll. And so there are some HCD fees. Generally speaking, we would ask the seller to pay for those. And use tax charged at point of sale. And the use tax is usually going to be paid by the buyer, although you can see it could be negotiated anyway. It could be a buyer or seller or both. But the use tax is a little bit different because the use tax has to do with the manufactured home that has space rent and things. So it's almost like a sales tax when you buy that. It's like buying a car kind of. If sales tax in your area is 8%, then you are likely to have to pay a similar price on that mobile home. All right. Last couple things to remember on this form is park conditions. So park conditions change. When you're in a park, specifically, and you're paying space rent and things, a lot of times the HOA that's there, the one that controls the park, will make improvements to the park. And then they will change things and they'll put it in there. They'll put it in their minutes and everything, that now it's going to be a required rule that you have a fence no higher than 4 feet or something, whatever it is. I'm just throwing that out there. And so the people that are living there, that's going to pretty much be grandfathered in, and nobody's going to make them replace a fence and things most of the time. However, they have a certain amount of time to complete them. And when they sell, they have to complete them. So the new buyer has to be aware of what the park conditions are. And the park conditions have to do with fencing. It might have to do with landscaping. It might have to do with property encroachments and things where your carport kind of came too close to the property line, blah, blah, blah. Whatever those kind of things are, you'll have to make those adjustments. It's important that a buyer understand that. And you can see here that after 5 days, or 5 days after delivery of the park conditions, that either party may cancel this agreement based on what the park conditions are. So you can understand how important it is to find those things out ahead of time and get those in place right off the bat. The other thing to know is that occupying a used manufactured home, even though it is sold in its present physical condition, the Mobile Home Parks Act, we have a lot of acts and codes and health and safety codes and things like that. Nice to have the government watching out for us, isn't it? But it has to meet those standards. Now, those standards have to do with a lot of these things here, and it can also be some local standards. But if it's supplied with gas and things, then there has to be certain things to make it conform to the regulations. You can't just all of a sudden attach, you can't all of a sudden just run a wire from the electric pole to your house and have electricity and things. All those things have to be conforming to what the requirements of that particular department are, whether it's sanitation with water and sewer, or whether it's electricity, or whether it's whatever. Now, do we run into that when we're in a park? Not usually. Generally, those are all taken care of. Where we run into it is the guy that decides to put a manufactured home out on his 5-acre piece of property that he's owned for years, and he digs a pit for a septic system, but never completes it with a tank, and just variations of things on there. So we don't have expertise in this area. Usually we might know a little bit, but we certainly don't have expertise. And so broker recommends that buyer obtain inspection to determine if property is in compliance with the requirements. And we have everybody sign off on it, and then that addendum is finished, and that's done anytime we have a manufactured home. One of the other things that comes out is probate. And I'm sure you know what probate is, but if you don't, I'll just briefly tell you that the owners of the house have passed away and not had anything in a trust with a trustee handling it. They may have had a will, but the will is not specific to real estate property. They may have a power of attorney, but the power of attorney is not specific. So what has to happen is that somebody in the family, or somebody, if there is no family, somebody that they've had contact with or know well, or friends or whatever, has to go to probate. So you take it to an attorney, or they take it to an attorney. The attorney sets up a probate, and this identifies that this property is part of a probate. That's what the probate agreement is for. And it's part of an estate or a conservatorship. And a conservatorship means I'm handling an entire estate. Of guardianship might mean that the person who's actually, I may have had guardianship over this person because they haven't been capable of handling their own affairs for quite a while. anyway, the attorney will tell you how they are going to set that up. And so you will hear from the attorney, or you will be talking to the attorney directly to help set that up. And there are some things here that are identified that we need to make sure we tell other people, because it's a disclosure issue either for our buyer or whatever. One is that court confirmation may apply. And what that means, and the court can determine this, if you go in there and all you own is one property and that's all you're putting on here, and it's $100,000 or something like that, then it probably is not going to require court confirmation. Court confirmation is usually necessary when there are multiple heirs or multiple beneficiaries, but it's not initially, it's not set up that way. You hope that it doesn't require. You hope that they just establish a single, that the court, when it goes in there and the attorney opens probate, they review it, and that they determine that court confirmation is not required. If, however, it does, then that doesn't make it, impossible to get taken care of. The seller notifies the buyer that court confirmation is required, or court confirmation becomes required as a result of an objection to the terms of the sales by one of the beneficiaries. Terry has 4 brothers, and we don't always agree on everything, but most of the time we're pretty close. We're pretty close in concert with each other as far as how things should go. But if one of us all of a sudden gets ruffled feathers or anything else, they can delay a probate. They can cause some issues. They can contest part of it, especially if it's one person says, well, I'm living in the house and I've been taking care of Dad for the last 10 years while I was in the house, and none of the rest of you did that. In fact, you rarely even came to visit. So is it fair that we split everything equally 5 ways? Well, if there's some dissension there and some people are kind of objecting to the whole thing, then court confirmation may be required, and that will require another hearing. So there's court confirmation. We get all of that information in. One thing that happens when court confirmation is required is that there's also other people that can come to the table with what's called overbids, and somebody can actually outbid even whatever offer was accepted to start out with. They can go in and they can overbid that if they wanted to. Usually the overbid will be, I've seen it where it's just been, you can go up in bids of $500 or something. The judge will establish that depending on the value of the property. Property may be valuable enough that they're not going to accept increments smaller than $1,000 or $2,000 or $10,000 or whatever they put on it as a price. Then that's what you have to overbid it by. So, but people can come in. I have been sitting in a court waiting for court confirmation with a client that we had an accepted offer, but in court, the bidding started. There were several people that wanted this property. Bidding started, it kept going up. Finally, my buyer said, I'm not going to go any higher than that. And they chose to back out of the deal at that point, which they can. So, one thing here to remember, and this is in bold letters, not just highlighted by Terry, but this is in bold letters. It says if buyer defaults after court confirmation. Okay, so we go to court, the court confirms our sale. Yay, now we're happy. This may, and now you vacate that as a buyer, you default, you say, no, I can't do that. I've checked into things, now things are different, I can't do it, whatever. And it say this may result in buyer's forfeiture of the full deposit or any amount the court may determine to satisfy any deficiency in sales price costs or other losses by the seller. So literally at that point in time, if you as a buyer get the property and sometime during the course of things you choose to back out, then you probably, and I'm not going to say you will for sure, but you have a really good chance of losing all or at least some of your deposit at that point in time. So pay attention to that. The seller may remove the property from the court calendar if the buyer has not removed all contingencies or only these contingencies checked below 10 days prior to court confirmation hearing date. So if you're going to do inspections, if you're going to get a loan, if you're going to do any of those things, you need to do them within no later than 10 days prior to court confirmation date. You can't go in there 5 days prior to court confirmation and find out that, or and decide on something. Well, we did a buyer's investigation and found this and that and this and that, and so now we don't want the property anymore. You can't do that in the last couple of days, or this above part here is going to apply. Couple of last minute things. Vesting, buyer intends to take title as follows, and it asks for that in the offer. So the buyer in this case is Nita Holmes, and she is going to take it as a single woman or whatever it happens to be. Title is decided ahead of time. And they should check with an attorney or their tax guy or something to make sure they take title right. And dispute resolution, even if initialed in the body of the agreement. Now, you remember in the RPA that we covered a week ago that there is a special blocked off couple of paragraphs that talk about mediation and liquidated damages and things. If initialed in the body of the agreement, the paragraphs for liquidated damages, mediation, and arbitration are deleted from the agreement due to probate court having jurisdiction. Now, if you read that liquidated damages clause carefully, it does not necessarily say probate, but it does establish the fact that liquidated damages only applies when there is no court involvement. So we do mediation, we do arbitration, and then you can be subject to losing the money. If there's a court involved, and in the case of this probate, there is court involvement. So that means that liquidated damages, mediation, and arbitration, they're deleted from the agreement. Any problems that we have can't be decided through arbitration or through mediation. They have to be taken care of in court because the court is involved. So this is interesting here, and that is that the court, any of the agreements that you have related to commission basically can be overturned and or confirmed by the court. You look at C here, and this isn't checkbox stuff. These are just things to notice, but you look at C here, the court will determine the commission amount. So you might go in there, you may have written everything up that you're going to have a 6% this or a 5% that or a X.5% or whatever it was that you decided. You come up with that number and you go to court, then the court could change that commission amount. They could say, no, that's not happening. We're only going to do this, and you have to accept whatever it is they do. Or there are no really options for fighting. Now, this is part of this probate advisory that downloads at the same time. And this is a critical part of it as well. And that is that there are exemptions to some of your disclosure that's required. Notice on here, it says the TDS, the NHD, and the natural hazard disclosure. And it also should imply in there SPQ, but the reason it doesn't say anything about the SPQ is because the SPQ is not a government mandated disclosure where these others are. But it says that with the TH, with all of these things, the seller is exempt from providing the buyer with any of these things. All right, so if it's a probate deal, you know that they're not required to give you a TDS. Now, why is that? Well, the why is that is because most of the time, whoever is handling the probate, whoever was assigned by the courts to take care of the probate, it didn't ever live in the house, or they lived in it when they were kids, but they don't live in it anymore, and they haven't for years and years and years, and so they don't know what's going on with the house. And if it's in probate, then the seller is exempt from having to do these things. They're also exempt from providing the homeowners earthquake and safety guide. They also are exempt from state requirements that require operable smoke detectors to be in place. Now, let me take a step further on that, and that is if you're getting a loan, a lender can still require smoke detectors to be in place. So that can be a lender requirement, but if it's not a probate requirement. All right, so here it says the ones that you're not exempt from. Seller is not exempt from they are obligated to disclose material facts affecting the value and desirability of the property. So you're not exempt from telling them anything you know. If you're the seller and you happen to be one of the children and you know that mom died in the house, that's a material fact that has to be disclosed. So there are things that are material facts that have to be disclosed. Seller is not exempt from obligations to disclose earthquake and fault zones. Now, I think this is kind of, I don't know, this kind of trips over itself a little bit because up here it says that you do not have to provide an NHD. But then down here, it says that you are obligated to disclose earthquake, fault zone, seismic hazard zone, state fire responsibility areas, very high fire, special flood, and flood hazard zone. So you have to provide them, even though the specific NHD form is not required. Now, I don't know how people know all of those things unless they have the NHD. So my thought would be that you need to move ahead on the NHD, even though it's not required. Water heaters, they still have to be properly anchored and braced. You still have to let people know about lead-based paint possibilities. You have to have the carbon monoxide devices in place. Megan's Law, of course, that's in the contract itself. Those things all still have to be done. All right, well, Terry, if I don't have to do any of these TDSs and stuff, I'm just not gonna have anything. No, we have a form called the ESD, which is an exempt seller disclosure. That is only a one pager that just indicates that the seller does not live in the property and hasn't lived in the property, and they are representing a probate or they are representing a trust or something else. That form needs to be put in place of those so that somebody knows. Still, it's a disclosure item. All right. Here's where I mentioned if there's a death in the property, you know, most people know that one way or the other. And so that is our probate part of things. Any questions on the probate or anything we've covered so far? Okay, we'll continue moving. In the contract, as we covered last week or the week before, whenever it was, there's a little box on there that says that the purchase of this property is reliant upon the sale of the buyer's property. The buyer has to sell the property they're living in order to buy this new property. So you check that box, which says that there's a contingency for the sale of the buyer's property, and this form downloads for you. And this form says that we have to sell a property. There are some things that you can check on here that either strengthen or lessen an offer. And so pay attention closely to what those are. But here it says, this agreement is contingent upon buyer entering into a contract for the sale and closing on the buyer's property. All right, so the address will be in another spot, but we have to sell a property in order to do this. Or only entering into a contract. So that's a little risky, but you could check that box. That just means that if you get an offer on it, then your contingency goes away and we're moving forward. But if your deal falls apart, there's nothing in there that gives you another opportunity. So This is a little safer one to check only on the close of escrow of the buyer's property, which is already in escrow with 21st century escrow. Escrow number, blah, 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 close date of blah, 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 and it's all evidenced here. So we have actually a property in escrow, which makes a lot of difference when you're talking about a contingency for sale of property. Here, the buyer shall, this breaks down how much time you have. So let's assume that we're not doing C here, that we're just relying on A to take effect. So buyer has how much time to enter into a contract? So do you just leave it open endlessly? No, the buyer defaults to 17 days, or you can change that to a different period if you want to. And that once you enter into a contract, you have 2 days to notify the other side that you have entered into a sale. Or this one is not a good one. It's okay, but it's not as good. And that is that listing status. So buyer has signed a listing agreement for the buyer's property or shall within 3 days. So actually some people go out and they shop for property prior to even listing their property. They say, well, I'll sell it if I can find a replacement. All right, well, that's okay, but you have to let people know that. You have to let people know what you're doing. And this is how you do that. Buyer has signed or will be signing within 3 days. So that kind of pushes him into a fork with me, with Century 21 Masters, whatever. And buyer's property is or will be submitted in the MLS. So I'm committing to some things, but none of them have happened yet. That's why these up here are a little more solid. And certainly this one that's already in escrow is the most solid of them. And then seller agrees to keep, or buyer agrees to keep seller informed about the status of the transaction. Cancellation of buyer's property. If buyer's property is in or enters escrow and either party to that escrow gives the other a notice of cancellation, buyer within 2 days after shall deliver to the seller written notice of that cancellation, because it may affect some of these terms up here, but I have to let them know immediately. Backup offers. Seller shall have the right to continue to offer the property for sale for backup offers. All right, so that's not breaking any laws or violating any rules to continue to offer for backup offers. Removal of contingencies. So if seller accepts a written offers on the property, so you get another offer, seller shall have the right to give notice to the buyer in writing to remove any of the contingencies that they want. You do that with the contingency removal form. Or if they fail to do that, the seller may immediately cancel the agreement in writing. So let's talk about these cancellation things here, or these delayed right to remove contingencies. C1 defaults to immediate right to notify buyer anytime after acceptance. So what that is that I left it on for backup offers and I get a backup offer that is good and I'm willing to accept, then that first one allows you to let the buyer's agent know immediately that we've accepted another offer. And they have 2 days to remove the contingency for sale of a buyer's property immediately. They actually have 2 days, so that's not quite immediately, but they can immediately notify you of that, and you have 2 days. Or the delayed right to notify. So this is saying that same thing. I left it on for backup offers. I received another offer that was good, but I have to give you at least 17 days to find another property and remove the contingency yourself. Or 3, which is no right to notify buyer. Seller shall not have the right to invoke or notify the buyer during the entire term of the agreement. Now, from a buyer's standpoint, no right to notify the buyer. That means if I wrote a 45-day close of escrow, that for 45 days, the seller cannot do anything about that contract. They have to leave it in for the entire term. That's what a buyer would like. Now, what a seller usually would want is they would want to be able to tell you anytime anything came up. But generally, the one that is decided upon is to give them 17 days to find a property, because if I just started looking, who knows if I'm going to be able to find one quick enough. So it's kind of one of those things where obviously the seller would prefer this one, the buyer would prefer this one, and you'll probably settle somewhere around here. So this is just a little list of sellers' right to cancel. And that's, you see that there's 5 or 6 things after giving the buyer written notice to remove the contingency and provide proof of funds. After first giving up notice buyer to perform, you fail to enter into a contract. So understand that all of these, if you look at them, it's after first giving them an NBP, after first giving an NBP, after first giving them an NBP, after first giving an NBP. So they still have the right to perform. And you as a seller still have to give them whatever was written into the contract. You have to give them that much time to accomplish those things. And buyer's right to cancel, not very many, right? The buyer may cancel this agreement if prior to buyer's removal of the property contingency, buyer's unable to enter into a contract on another property. But all of these all have to do with the buyer being able to get a property within a specified period of time. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with buyers. Now, that's a good and a bad. The good is if I'm working with a buyer, kind of puts a deadline on how much time we have to devote to finding a property and things. When the inventories are low, that may need to be a little bit longer period of time. When the inventory is high and we have lots of houses in their specific within their specific perimeters, then we could be in pretty good shape. So we just have to pay attention to those times. Everybody signs and agrees. Yay. All right, now there's some things we don't agree on. So the offer comes in, a buyer and his or her agent writes an offer, and the offer comes in, and we were asking, I don't know, in this case, and I didn't put too much in here, but let's just say that they offered, or that we had a price of $725,000, and they offered us less than that. Say they offered us $690,000, and the seller says, I'm not accepting $690,000, but we can counter them at $705,000 and see if they'll come up to that. And in this seller counteroffer, notice how many blank lines there are. There's a lot of them, which means that you can counter out a lot of different things. You can counter out who's going to take care of the escrow. You can counter out how many days to close escrow. Maybe they asked for 60, you don't want to go any more than 45. Maybe it doesn't matter. The maybes can get endless. Basically, anything that the seller does not like about the offer, you have the opportunity to include it in a seller's counteroffer. There's nothing that you can do illegal about the seller's counteroffer. Well, that's probably not true, but not really as far as the items that generally come up. So we counteroffer these things. They told us that they wanted to go into a backup offer position because they know that there's already in there. Well, then I want you to include a backup offer addendum, or I want different things. Seller's license to remain in possession. I need to stay in the house once I sell it for about 15 days because I need my money out of this house to buy the next house, and that'll take me a few days to close, whatever it happens to be. If I want those included as part of the contract, I check these boxes or this box or whatever. If I'm going to leave tenants in place, then I want the TOPA. If I need to find a replacement property, then I'm gonna send you this counteroffer, and it's gonna include the SPRP, which is seller's purchase of replacement property. And whatever it happens to be, I can include it in this counteroffer, and then this becomes the seller's counteroffer. And notice on here it says, and this is a biggie because people run into this all the time. I get phone calls about this at least 2 or 3 times a month, it seems like. Well, we wrote a counteroffer and they haven't gotten back to us, and now we have a new offer, and can we accept it? And so here's what it says. Seller has the right to continue to offer the property for sale. Seller has the right to accept any other offer received prior to acceptance of this counter by the buyer. All right, so if we haven't gotten anything back from the buyer saying that they accepted this counteroffer, they're still thinking about it, they're talking with their lender to see if they can get more, whatever it is. If I don't have this back signed and agreed to by everybody, then the seller can move forward on another offer that comes in the meantime. So today is Monday. So I received an offer on Sunday. We wrote a counteroffer on Sunday, and Tuesday another offer comes in. I haven't gotten a signed counteroffer back. I have the right as a seller to accept that new offer. And then I just let the other people know that I'm sorry, but we accepted another offer. Now, does the buyer have to accept the seller's counteroffer? No, not necessarily. Remember those things that we just talked about how they can continue to accept offers and leave the property active. So here is the buyer's counteroffer. Well, we want the purchase price to be $690, and close of escrow then will agree to 40 days, and escrow holder will be 21st Century Escrow. And so they counter with those items and sign here. If the seller accepts that, they sign here and we have a deal. Now, the deal is going to be a combination of the RPA and the counteroffers. That's what consummates the deal, right? It takes both of them to put that together. Both of those go into escrow, so that escrow knows to change the price that was on the RPA or to change the date for close of escrow. Notice on here that we have a multiple counteroffer. Now, we run into those various times. I'm sure that anybody who's been in business for a while has had more than one offer come in on a property. So the question I get asked sometimes, and I'll just answer it up front, and that is that if I get more than one offer in, do I have to do a multiple counteroffer? And my answer to that is not, unless you're going to do more than one counteroffer. If you're satisfied, 3 offers come in, and you're satisfied with offer B, you can accept offer B without countering anybody else. If you choose to counter, you can counter all 3, or you can counter 2. You don't have to counter everybody. If you get offers in this case, we were in the $700,000 price range. If you get somebody that comes in with a price of $700,000 and a price that comes in, sometimes how the investor folks are out there, and smart folks, that's how they got to where they could invest. But they're going to offer you $575 for it or something, because they see some work done, plus they also see where they stand to make a profit. So they're going to offer $575. The seller does not have to counteroffer both of those. They have 2 offers sitting in front of them. Only one of them is good enough for them to accept. They can just accept that one, or they can counter that one maybe and just change the price a little bit, or change the close of escrow time a little bit, and only counter one. You don't have to counter the other one and say, if you'll come up from 575 to 700,000, then we'd love your cash deal. Well, they wouldn't love it. So there's no sense in messing with something that's that far apart. But when there's multiple counter offers, is generally when you have two or three offers that are fairly similar, and the resulting net is going to be about the same to the seller. But we just need to change this a little and change that a little. And then you send out the multiple counter form. And it says right at the top, you can't be confused, seller multiple counter offer form. That also kind of pushes the buyers a little bit towards a quicker reaction, because if they know that it's the multiple offer, they go, oh, you mean they countered more than one? Yep, that's what this means. They countered more than one. Oh, well, then I guess we ought to consider accepting what they do or whatever. And that'll push them towards a quicker response in most cases. But don't make a multiple counter offer just to make them make a quicker response. You do what's right. Okay. Binding effect. Seller is making multiple counter offers to other prospective buyers on terms that they may or may not be the same as in this counteroffer. And what that means is that everybody's purchase price doesn't need to be the same. There might be some other things that affect it. Maybe the purchase price is the reason for countering one, but maybe the other one has to do with how many concessions we're making or how much time it's going to take to close escrow or something. So you don't have to have exactly the same things. You just have to have what the seller would be satisfied with this buyer and what they would be satisfied with this buyer. So just remember that they don't have to be exactly the same. And then here it says, this multiple counteroffer does not bind seller and buyer unless all of the following occur. And then when you look at the following, basically it is that this is one of the biggies. Okay, so that the seller signs it, right? And they send it out. That's where the seller signs is right here. Poof. And then the buyer signs it, and that's in paragraph 7, which is right here. So then the buyer signs it. And then it has to go back to the seller, and the seller will sign in paragraph 7. And then once you have the seller and the buyer and the seller signing a final time, and everybody agreeing to the accepted multiple counteroffer, that's when we have a deal. Hope that makes sense to you. That's why it's in kind of a, I highlighted it, but it also on the form itself, it's put in a rectangular box here to make sure that it stands out to you. Because people don't understand sometimes. You get multiple counteroffers out there. Well, my buyer signed it. Okay, well, I don't have it. And you hear that from another agent. You know, the agent calls and says, yep, my buyer is signing this. Okay, do they have it signed yet? No, not yet. Oh, they're signing it tonight. Okay. Get it over to me because that other one is still in effect, right? The others, it's kind of like and it's not who first signs it, it's who first signs it and gets it back to the seller through the seller's agent. So the seller has to get the return on it in order for it to be a final acceptance. So just remember that a little bit. All right, addendums. So things happen. On this one, let's see, Nita Holmes was buying the property, and her sister, Wanda Holmes, needed to be added to the contract because maybe they didn't have enough, income with just Nita. Maybe they needed a little bit stronger credit report. Maybe who knows what they need. Maybe they just decided to buy the house together. And so now they want to be added to it. So you can do things after the fact. You just have to make sure that everybody knows about it. So Wanda is to be added as a buyer to the loan. You could make an addendum, for instance, that sometimes you look at things and you find out that 54321 Banana Peel Way is not the right property. That actually, when you looked at it further, you found out that 54323 Banana Peel Way is the address that should have been on there. You could make up an addendum that just says buyer and seller understand that 54323 is the corrected address on the contract. So you can, and notice how many lines are on here, which means that you can correct about anything you have to. The only thing is that you remember when you have a correction, it needs to be acknowledged by both. Everybody needs to know what's going on. One person cannot do it. Nita Holmes cannot add Wanda Holmes without I'm a learning knowing about it. So everybody has to sign off on it. Once everybody's signed off on it, it can go to escrow. And then escrow knows about it because everybody signed off on it. And if they only have one signature, escrow is not going to move forward. They're going to send it back to you and say, can we get the seller or the buyer, whichever hasn't signed, can we get that on there? Okay, so we've added this Wanda to this deal. And we've already got all the paperwork done and all of the disclosures are done and everything else is done. Or maybe we have more signatures on it. Maybe it's not just Wanda, maybe it's Wanda and Steve and another brother. So who knows what's going on? Maybe there's multiple people that are getting involved in this. Maybe they've decided to make it a family affair and they're all going to buy part of it. We're going to divide it into fourths or whatever. That's all okay. If you've already started the process. Or if you don't have, if you had people living in different states and so they weren't all around to sign the original stuff, the original paperwork, the original disclosures, the original wherever you are in the transaction, then you can still get them involved without having to redo everything and rewrite everything by doing an additional signature addendum. This basically here, understand what this kind of thing is. This is not to be used to add a new party after a contract has been formed. So a contract, this signs on things like conditions and disclosures and things like that. This is more for those people that live out of the area. You've got John who lives here in town, and Ima who lives out of town, and everybody lives in a different place. They can still get the paperwork. I acknowledge receipt of the documents above, and I sign here. I don't agree to the liquidated damages, and I sign here. There's actually a new form coming out for that in June that actually has a liquidated damages provision. But for now, this is the form we use. And somebody can sign this, and now they become an additional signer. They have agreed to, basically here, they acknowledge receipts of the documents above. So what documents are those? Then you write them in here and you're good. So existing agreement terms, amendment of existing agreement terms. So this, if we get down to where we have to, we didn't take care of it in a counter, we took care of it later. And the reason we took care of it later was because we finally came to an agreement on the price. And then guess who didn't agree on the price? The appraiser. The appraiser came in and says that, oh my gosh, I can only appraise this at, let's see, I think we agreed at a price of $705. I can only appraise this at $675. So if everybody agrees, and this is how we agree in writing, right? So we have an amendment of existing terms. And whatever those happen to be, based on an appraised value of $675, seller has agreed to lower the purchase price to $675,000, or parties agree to split the difference, or buyer agrees to pay the difference in the appraisal, and the whatever it happens to be, we can do those agreement terms. We can change agreement terms on closes of escrow. I'm having trouble getting information from my from the VA to do my VA eligibility and things. So we need to change a few things, and whatever it happens to be, you can amend in here. And that's just amending the existing agreement terms. Extension of time. See, this one's easy. This is, what does it say? It says an extension of time. Okay, well, we can't close escrow as soon as we thought because we're having some issues with the appraiser didn't get there in time. The Seller had some things that they had to do that they don't have finished yet, whatever it is, so we're extending the close of escrow to, and we're extending it by 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, whatever it happens to be. You can extend other contingency times, anything that has a time block on it, 17 days or 21 days, or anything that you've put in there, anything that has a time block on it. You can extend those contingencies. So maybe I want to extend the buyer investigation of property condition because I'm buying a specific property that has all kinds of city codes going on, and it's a commercial property. It's got different things happening. So I need more time to get my due diligence in, or whatever it happens to be. I need more time for the loan or other. So anything that you need an extension on that you've written a contingency on, maybe it has to do, maybe you haven't gotten your well certification yet. Because it had to be sent off because of chemical testing and things. And maybe the termite company can't get things done in time. So whatever it is, we can take care of these things with extensions on different times. If everybody signs off on it, everybody agrees to it, then it becomes part of the contract. And as part of the contract, it goes to escrow to let them know that now the times have been changed on this or on that, unless it's an investigation time. If it's just a time period change to change a contingency on how much time you need to investigate or how much time you need to do on that, then escrow doesn't need to know. If it's an extension of time on escrow, then obviously they need to know because they're pushing towards whatever date was established on that initial contract. Okay. So I think we finished up all of the ones. Actually, we finished a little quicker than I thought. So there were some others that I didn't put in here, but anybody have any questions on those addendums and things? Basically, just know that you can renegotiate and change and do anything that everybody will agree to. But they all require agreement because the contract itself is an agreement between two parties. So any changes, any extensions, any amendments, any addendums, anything that goes on needs to be agreed to by both parties. And that's your documentation in writing, the things that it talks about in the contract itself. These are the terms, and unless otherwise identified in writing, these are the terms. And so anything that you're changing, these are the forms that you use to help write it up and change it. Does that make sense? Anybody have any amazing questions? All right. I don't see any hands flying up. I don't see a flurry of people running. Is anybody still awake out there? See, not one person said they were awake.
Yes,
All right.
I'm awake.
Yeah, okay, we got, and Brenda's awake. Good. Carolyn's awake. See, there's a few of you now that are saying you're awake. Yeah. Did somebody have to wake you to admit that you're awake? All right. Anyway, have a good day. Be careful if your streets are slick because of rain. And we will talk soon. Call if you need anything.
Thank you, Terry.
You're welcome, of course.